Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us is another author from the Curious Corvid family and community. Now, my guest is a backyard poet and a dual forensics and film student from a small town in Georgia. She's the author of Is It Bad If My Gums Bleed When I Floss by Curious Corvid, which came out in 2024. Their poetry and short fiction has been published by Exists Otherwise, Free the Verse, and Laughing Man House Publishing. And I'm so excited to have them here on the show. So, without further ado, let us give a huge round of applause to our guest today and another member of the Curious Corvid family, Blue Sunshine. Blue, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I've never done anything like this before, so it's a first for me.
Awesome, Blue. Awesome. So before we dive into your publication, as a little icebreaker, is there a random fact that not a lot of people may know about you?
Random fact. I make a lot of poetry broadsides. I don't have any with me right now, but I hand make them and hand type them. I don't share a lot about that, but it's something I really enjoy doing.
Nice. Very, very nice. Now, in regards to your publication, Is It Bad If My Gums Bleed When I Floss? What can you tell us about that publication? What can readers expect?
This is a light horror poetry collection following a character named Nettie from childhood to adulthood as she endures traumatic abuse and kind of discovers her queer identity. So it's about that trauma and healing on the other side of that.
Interesting. So is it more of like a narrative style story, but told in a narrative story, but told in a style of poetry?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Nice, very nice. It also seems to me that it's a little bit. Is it fair to say it's kind of like a mixed genre story because it's a mix of so many different things?
It is kind of a bit more, experimental. As far as poetry goes, it is kind of a mix of like horror and romance and like queer youth coming of age. That's the word I was looking for, coming of age.
Okay, all right. So before we dive deep into your story, Blue, let's talk a little bit more about you as a person. So from your bio, you are a backyard poet and a dual forensic and film student from Georgia. What really put you on the path to using poetry, or rather discovering poetry as an outlet to share your stories?
It kind of just was like a thing that I did every night in my diary to kind of cope with a lot of things that I was experiencing. And I've never been too good with speaking. So poetry was kind of like my way of sorting through everything that was happening through words. And eventually that turned into creating a book.
Ooh, okay, all right. Now, this I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Blue, because I've talked with a good number of poets on the show. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on this debate that whereas narrative fiction, like trade fiction, is more, depending on the story, more outlined and thought out, poetry is more like spontaneous, writing from the seam of your pants. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, that was definitely how I did it. Yeah, kind of, you just, at least what I did is I had a bunch of poems that I wrote without really thinking too much about connecting them all together, and then realized I had a bunch of poems that are about the same subject, and they're all about teeth. So then I was able to kind of weave them together in a cohesive manner. So it was a bit, yeah, just kind of flying by the seat of my pants there.
All right, all
Yeah.
right. And now is our first fan question of the interview, Blue. And this may border into spoilers, so give as much or as little as you would like.
Right.
But one of my reviewers would like to know, in your publication, do you have a favorite poem as well as a challenging slash difficult poem?
Ooh, yes. The most challenging poem for me was Daddy. Um, I don't want to spoil too much, but it's probably the closest to like what I actually have personally experienced,
Hmm.
close to my story. So it was hard writing that one and trying to keep it in the mind frame that this isn't exactly my story. It's Nettie's story. Um, and my favorite poem is probably um, "The Tooth Fairy is an Anesthesiologist." That was
Ooh, that is
yes.
that sounds like a really good one, but for some reason my mind is instantly thinking to like a horror kind of movie.
Yeah, I think there is a horror movie where the Tooth Fairy is the monster. So
Definitely. Nice. Okay, that's actually really, really fascinating. Tooth Fairy is an anesthesiologist. Honestly, I have never heard an idea for that, but that is really, really, really fascinating. So, as a poet, Blue, what ultimately has been your goal with not only this publication, but also the promise you're making to yourself as well as others who either may have gone through something similar as referenced in your poetry, as well as an emotional reaction?
mhm. Well, when I first started writing, it was more so for myself, just kind of figuring out what happened and how I felt about it, how it changed me, and that sort of stuff. But as I've gotten older, um, I first wrote this collection. I think the first poem I wrote, I was 15 years old, and I finished it when I was 18. Now I'm 22, so as I've gotten older, kind of gained more experience and more distance from that uh, trauma, then I've um, focused more on sharing my poetry, writing my poetry with the intent of, um, I guess, victim advocacy. Um, so people can find themselves in my poetry and feel seen and feel heard, that their experiences aren't um, something that they have to endure alone, that there are other people out there who know what they've gone through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when you embarked on being a poet, I'm very curious. When did you feel confident in yourself to claim that title of being a poet? It's almost the same mentality of being an author and a writer. You know, we write and we create stories, but we never feel confident in taking ownership. When
Mhm.
did you feel confident in yourself to claim ownership that, yes, I am a poet, as opposed to a person who just writes poetry?
Hmm. That one has honestly always been a hard one for me. Sometimes it still is, but I think when I'd finished writing "Is It Bad If My Gums Bleed When I Floss," and I sent it to Curious Corvid Publishing and received a response back from Raven White that
Hmm.
the collection was one of the most powerful things she had ever read. Then I kind of felt maybe, maybe I am a poet. Maybe this is something that I can call myself.
Nice. Very, very nice. And this kind of goes into another fan question, which I've been starting to ask a lot of people on the show, and a lot of people have been stumped thus far. So let's see if you can answer this question.
Right.
So this question asks, in your opinion, Blue, is there a difference between a poet who just writes their poetry as opposed to a poet who is an author, who has an anthology of poems?
Mm, that is a very difficult question. Um, Honestly, I don't think there is a difference. I think a poet who writes their poetry is what will start us and
Mm,
eventually become poets who write anthologies and collections, but we all started at that person who's just writing poetry.
100% agree. Absolutely. Now, when you began writing this poem, or these poems in particular, I know you said earlier that you began writing at a very young age, 15 years of age. When did you tell your friends and family, or those that you trust, that you were embarking on this new journey of yours?
I was 18 when I told them, and it was the week before the deadline to submit. And
Ah,
yes, I asked if one of my close friends, Christine Dance, she's also an author, if she could just read it and let me know if she thought it had any merit. And she was like, yes, absolutely, submit it. And that was the first person I told.
ooh, okay, all right. Now, in terms of reviews and reactions, what has that been like, especially before joining Curious Corvid and then afterwards being an official author with the company?
Mm. Well, before, when it was just like close friends reading the collection, it was all very emotional responses because they'd they knew me and they'd seen how I'd grown through these experiences. And so I think for them it was very personal and emotional, and they were very proud. And then after it was published and it became more of an official thing, obviously people who are reading the collection don't know me. So it's a bit different. It's all been very positive, but I think I've seen more of the ways that I had like, I guess, fallen short in some of the horror aspects and those things, which is something I've been trying to improve on with my writing now.
Absolutely. Now, as you also mentioned that these poems are, well, written in the style of, traditional poems, they are telling a linear story with the main character.
Yes.
So, how did you come about that, as opposed to just writing a traditional story, but instead realizing there is an avenue to take poetry and use it as, traditional storytelling with a main character? So how did you develop that to where it made sense for your style of writing?
Mm. At that time, I just had a character in my mind, Nettie, and when I had all these poems, and she wasn't really in any of them, but I was always kind of thinking about her when I was writing them. And instead of putting it into a longer form, instead of a poem, I just kind of decided it would be more fitting for her story as she falls in love with a poet. It would be more fitting for her if her story was told through poetry rather than like a longer narrative form.
Ooh, all right, all right. Now, this next set of questions is a two-parter, Blue, and I'm really intrigued to hear your thoughts on. And that is, of course, what does it mean to be a poet and an author in the digital age? So we'll start off with the first, icebreaker questions.
Mhm.
First one, as a poet and as a writer, have you ever experienced writer's block? And if so, how did you overcome it?
I experience writer's block very frequently, to be honest. Um, as a poet, a lot of those poems are written, spontaneously. I think that's something a lot of poets relate to. You can't really force it. Um, so my solution for writer's block has always been to take a step back from whatever it is I'm working on and go read or watch something else and kind of take things in, um, and figure out ways that I can develop and correct the things that I'm having an issue with in my own writing.
Ooh, okay. Next question, and I think this one affects every creative. How do you deal with imposter syndrome?
Mm. Oh, that's a very difficult one. It's yeah, I've never been too good at dealing with imposter syndrome. I guess whenever I'm really struggling with it, I turn to my friends and I talk to them about it, and they're always like, you have a full poetry collection and several poems published online. People, read your writing. People have thoughts on your writing, and they may not always be positive, but that's part of you know what being a writer is, especially in you know an age right now where you can just post a review online and um, immediately get that feedback.
Absolutely. And now, in regards to social media, which is something that every creative struggles with, social media, as I'm sure you'll definitely agree, is a boon to indie creatives,
Mhm.
also a double-edged sword. We leave ourselves exposed to a lot of negative side effects of social media. It's exhausting, it's
Mhm.
draining, a lot of things. And I'm very curious, in the digital age, being a poet, how have you been able to discipline yourself to still stay true to who you are, not just as a creative, but also as a person?
Mhm. Um, the biggest thing for me is just not looking at the numbers, the like how many followers I have, or comparing myself especially to other poets who like I admire. Um, I can't, I've got to separate myself from like the statistics, and the engagement side of things, because if I focus too much on that, then I find myself trying to fit into like the trends and like a mold of someone that I'm not, and it's really hard to maintain that.
Yes, 100%. And now, of course, the big elephant in the room, which I'm sure you'll definitely agree with, is the rise of generative AI in publishing.
Mhm.
I would like to know your own personal thoughts on generative and AI, and if there is a stopping point somewhere down the road, or do you believe that as long as it is being used and has continued use, it will unfortunately be the new standard in the publishing industry?
Mm. Personally, I am very anti AI, and I see a lot of the literary magazines that at least that I associate with. So I could be kind of overlooking some that I don't read or submit to, but a lot of those magazines are also anti-generative AI. So I think eventually in the publishing industry, I hope we'll come to a point where it's not so common, and um, but I do have some suspicions of it'll keep growing bigger and will eventually be more widely accepted in the publishing industry.
Absolutely, 100% agree. So now let's actually talk about a little bit of the business side of being a creative. So once your book was published by Curious Corvid,
Mhm.
how did the marketing aspect really play into, your awareness into the digital world? And what really surprised you about, oh shoot, now I actually have to market my book, like help with the marketing side?
Yeah. um, this wasn't still is something that's very difficult for me to do, because I didn't have much of an online presence before starting. So
Okay.
yeah, I was kind of trying to build an audience while also marketing for the book, and it is difficult to do. Um, and yeah, I was very surprised by, like, I knew how much work it was, but I was very surprised actually trying to do that work. And I grew a lot of appreciation for the people who are able to do that.
Nice. Now, I don't know if you are currently working on any other publications in secret, but if you are, what is the one thing that you wish you would do differently or will do differently looking back on how you approached marketing your first book.
Definitely start sooner, and be more consistent with how much I'm posting about it.
Yes, that is very true. I also am guilty of not being consistent with my post for my book, so
Mhm.
I definitely understand the feeling.
Yeah, yeah. I never
And
want to feel like I'm shoving it down people's throats. But
mhm.
if you don't post a lot, then people don't see it. So it's a hard balance.
Yes, unfortunately, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. So now let's talk a little bit about the audience in particular. Now, as we kind of mentioned earlier and discussed, your poetry is an experiment of different genres. There's a little bit of romance, there's a little bit of horror involved. It's a mix match of so many different things. And poetry, like any other style of writing, has its own set of readers and expectations of how a certain poem in said genre is supposed to go,
Mhm.
which I imagine may not have been easy, especially also trying to write it in a style of a story. And as a creative, we find ourselves dealing with this balance of wanting something to be authentic to ourselves, but not have it be a copy of something, but nothing too original that's going to throw people off. So
Mhm.
for you, Blue, how did you really fine tune your audience, or did you have your audience in mind already, or did that come about later?
Yeah, that definitely came about later, when I was actually kind of pulling all the poems together and editing them to submit to Curious Corvid. I had to think about, well, if I'm sending this to a publisher, who exactly am I intending to read this? And I think with these, it being a narrative style is a bit easier for people who don't read poetry to um, kind of grasp what's going on. It's a little bit more accessible for a wider audience, which is was my goal when kind of pulling it together.
Nice. Very, very nice. So now let's talk about a little bit of some of the inspirations behind your poetry. So, are there any poems or specific authors, poets that have really played a role in your developing your voice as a poet?
Mhm. There are so many. um, the biggest ones I think are Grace R. Reynolds, who is also a poet at Corvid Publishing, and Sarah Renee Beach. She wrote a book called Impact that has really stuck with me, and I think about it all the time while I'm writing. And Marissa Langson, she wrote a poem. Uh, I can't remember the title right now, but it's like the Three Little Pigs, and it's published in Palette Poetry, and I recommend everybody read that because it's very very poignant, and it has a very strong message.
Mm, all righty. Now, also as another fan question for this topic, in your opinion, who are some of the most underappreciated or undeserved poets that you encountered in your own research and your own free time that deserve special recognition and notice?
Oh man, that's yeah. I do feel like Marissa Langson. I feel like more people need to know about Marissa Langson, and honestly, a lot of the poets in Curious Corvid Publishing, I feel, deserve more recognition. As an indie um, publisher, a lot of people overlook some of these poets and authors, but I do think they deserve more recognition.
Nice, amazing. And kind of going on the topic of, Curious Corvid, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about your experiences working with Curious Corvid, of not just, an author working with a company, but also being a part of a community that is so welcoming, so inviting, so inclusive,
Mhm.
that really makes you feel that, you're at home and this is where you belong.
Yeah, it's definitely that. I feel like it's not just a community, it's a home. And um I really I feel so grateful that I found Curious Corvid, and working with them has been amazing. It's been a great experience. I feel like everything that I wanted is it bad if my gums sleep when I floss to be. Raven really worked with me and listened to my ideas, and um, she made it happen.
Nice. Very, very nice. And now going into another fan question. This one I am really intrigued to see if what your answer would be as a poet. Now, as creatives, we tend to use a lot of the five physical senses in our writing in some shape or another. But in your opinion, Blue, which of the five senses do you think is the most difficult to showcase in our work?
Mhm. Definitely, for me at least, is describing like sensations of touch and feeling. Um, I always find that extremely difficult for whatever reason.
Nice. All right. Okay. Next one. Now, this is more so of like you as a reader, Blue, but which do you think is more intriguing to you? Do you prefer stories that have a lot of trope or poems, or more so of themes?
Mm, definitely, more so themes. That's my preference. I love a poetry collection with a really strong theme running throughout it. Like this is something that was mentioned in one of the reviews on my book, which I was really happy about. But Pig by Sam Sachs is a very strong thematic collection of poems.
Mm, all right, all right. And kind of a more personal, reflective question, Blue. Looking back on your success as a poet, how has being a poet changed your life for the better? And would it be different had you not pursued it?
Yes, it's definitely um, kind of put me in a path I never thought I would be able to take. When I first started writing poetry, and then when I published poetry, I was in like a pretty dark place, to be honest,
Mm,
and I didn't I didn't see too much of like where I was going in life, which I think is pretty common for teenagers, anyways. But it was like I don't know, a path that I could walk on and see myself um, kind of doing something, writing poetry. That'll always be something that I know I can do, even when everything else around me is not going the way that I expect it to. I can always just pick up a pen and a piece of paper. So that's been like a beacon of light.
very true. Very, very true. Now, poems and poetry tend to balance, the intensity of the words and the meaning of each poem with the emotional response and reaction.
Mhm.
For you, Blue, as a poet, what is your favorite way to introduce intensity in your writing, and how do you balance out the two? And is there a good example in your poem following following the main character?
Uh, Something I really like to do is I like to take nouns and use them as verbs. Um,
Ooh, I like that.
yes, I do have an example of it. I'll have to find it real quick, but it's it's an interesting technique, and it's not something that I came up with. It's something that a lot of poets do, is to kind of bend the way that we use language. If I could find it here somewhere. Mm. I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but I remember the I believe the line is "oxidize my red, vinegar my blood," and
Ooh,
I believe that's the line. It's been a while, but that's yeah what I really like to do, use that technique.
that is a good line. That is a good line. And speaking of techniques, as you said, using nouns as verbs, what is another technique that you like to use in your writing to really stand out?
Mm. I think this is like that, going back to that narrative style. I really enjoy building characters throughout my poems and getting to know those characters as the collection progresses. So it's a bit of a slower, um, longer technique, but it putting little clues and kind of hints about the character through each poem as everything goes on. That's something that I like to do.
All right. All right. Now, this one is probably one of my favorite questions to ask. Now, for you, Blue, as a fellow creative, which do you find to be the most difficult? Knowing when to stop writing and trust the process, or knowing when a story is finished?
Mm. It's more difficult for me to know when to stop writing. I have a really um, a bad habit of just continuing a poem for a very long time, and then most of the poems in my collection are very short. They're like one page, but all of those poems were several pages before I cut them down and realized I don't need to expand so much on this one idea. It can be a few stanzas, and that's fine.
All right. Okay. All right. And as we near the end of this incredible author interview, there are a few last questions I did want to ask. Now, this one is probably another good fan question. And this question is, if you had the opportunity to have one of your poems adapted into, let's say, a short film, which would it be and why?
Mm, that is a very difficult question. A very fun one. Uh, how it might be Career Day, um, which is about Nettie on career day at school, um, realizing she'd forgotten it's career day and didn't bring anything to kind of display what she wants to do, which is also a kind of goes along with her not knowing what she wants to do. And this is when she meets the poet that she'll fall in love with later in the book. And at that moment where she realizes that, I would love to see that in a short film.
Nice. Okay. All right. And the final question before we wrap up this amazing author interview is this. With everything we talked about and more, from your journey of becoming a poet, publishing your works, how you developed your voice and your own experiences, ultimately, at the end of the day, what do you want people to take away from this book?
I want them to realize that they're not alone. That's the biggest thing that I've always wanted from this book, is for people to know they're not alone and their experiences are shared, and they can be seen and be heard.
Beautifully said, Blue. Beautifully said. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Blue Sunshine for making her official debut here on the show. Now, Blue, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, purchase a copy of your book, if there are any projects in the works for 2026 or 2027, and do you have a pearl of wisdom you would like to give to the viewers and listeners?
You can find me on Instagram at Sunshine Blue Smalls. And I do have actually a few collections in the works, and they're out in submission right now. I haven't heard back, but fingers crossed that it'll be something that'll happen in 2026 or 2027. And my small pearl of wisdom is to focus more on the experience of writing than everything that comes after. To just try and live in the moment and enjoy what you're writing while you're writing it.
Beautifully said, Blue. Beautifully said. I'll attach all that down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. Thank you for joining us for an amazing episode here on the channel. I have one final episode for tomorrow that will wrap up February, and then come Sunday begins the first episode of the lineup of March, which I am still accepting, by the way. If you want to be a part of the March lineup, message me on Instagram, comment down below, or go to my website and fill out a form there, and I will see what I can do. Until then, thank you everyone for joining us for another amazing episode. A huge thank you to Blue for coming on the show. If you'd like to see Blue back on the show again in a follow-up or in a special episode of the Writers Hub, like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. And as always, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Happy Friday, everybody, and we'll see you all next time.